Dirty 30 strike was about solidarity in the face of the Tories. I think it's been really good to see it this week at a time when Ed Miliband was explaining at the Labour Party conference that the Labour Party was now going to be one nation Tories, because that makes it much simpler for us, because it means we know we've got three Tory parties rather than just one. Real solidarity is about workers in struggle. And our next speaker is Darren Moore, one of the original Dirty 30, who's never changed his principles, never changed his views. Darren.
I think first of all I'd like to thank Len and Brian for the film. I thought it was a pretty good film there. I'd also like to thank David Bell, because he initially started things off writing the book and documenting the, well, I suppose the Dirty 30 through the strike, really. It's important that things are documented for a number of reasons. I suppose, first off, it's 28 years since the start of the strike, and we're all, I suppose, our memories are fading. We're getting a bit older. Some of us look a little bit older. And I suppose the other thing I want to pay tribute to is obviously this year we lost two miners, and it's important to pay a bit of tribute to them, I think. Keith Mellin, who wasn't on the film, worked at Snowdon, moved to Leicestershire when he met his wife. When the Kent miners come up to picket, he was out on strike, and he stayed out on strike. Now, what he couldn't understand, I'd imagine like the rest of us, is there were a lot of miners who worked in Leicestershire who come from Scotland, Durham, second generation miners. Some of their families were on strike and they were crossing picket lines. Just didn't really understand it. Keith didn't say a lot. He was fairly quiet, certainly, you know, in terms of the strike. He said himself he did a lot of the mundane tasks in the strike. But when, I was proud to be at his funeral this year. A lot of miners came up from, ex-miners from Snowdon, from the rugby club at Snowdon, Colliery, where he worked. And obviously some of the striking miners were there. So I want to pay tribute to Keith, who we've lost this year. And I want to pay special tribute as well, really, to Benny Pinniger, a strike leader. I suppose, you know, we're good friends. I worked with him for at least 6 years after the strike. Strong character. It was the ideal man to lead the Dirty 30. Big contrast to the donkeys who led the Leicestershire NUM. Benny was never afraid to voice his opinion. And after they had the ballot in Leicestershire, I do recall one big union meeting down at Colville when we were there. There was, you know, around 300 miners there. I think there were 5 or 6 of us who were on strike. They'd had the ballot, people had gone back to work, they told us the strike was unconstitutional. But Benny, being Benny, got up waving the National Rule Book at the NUM delegates, telling them that, you know, a National Executive Committee decision overruled the Leicestershire Rule Book. The ballot was invalid. Of course, there were a lot of heckling. The atmosphere was pretty tense. In fact, I sort of recall looking where the exits were, because I think we might have to make a sharp one shortly. But as it happened, you know, it didn't stop Benny. He continued to tell them, you should be out on strike. You know, then, you know, most of the miners are out on strike. You can't take a decision on your own. The National Rule Book overrules your ballot. But as we know, people were pretty entrenched then, and we probably knew from that day, you know, most of the miners in Leicestershire were not going to come out on strike. They've been called back into the pit, saying that the votes in the canteen were unconstitutional by Trevor Hines and Jack Jones, and obviously once the ballot had gone, the momentum had gone for the strike in Leicestershire. We knew most of the people would vote to work. The pits in Leicestershire were closing. A number of the older miners were looking towards the redundancy money. I suppose, and a lot of them were fathers of the younger miners who were worried about, you know, didn't want to split families at the time. There were quite a few men out on them first 2 days, though. We turned half the men back before the ballot. But certainly the leaders of the Leicestershire NUM were instrumental in stopping any strike in Leicestershire. And I suppose to echo Benny's words as well, which he was never afraid to say, is you've got to decide which side you're on. And it's difficult to believe that working men would side with Thatcher's government as opposed to the colleagues in the coalfields. It did have a sense of humour though as well, Benny, because I can remember when we're back at work and working in the heading, the manager come up and said there's not much coal going on the belt, and you know, Benny sort of quipped, "Well, throw a few managers on, that'll soon fill it up." I suppose the other reason why the documenting it's important is obviously the history, and as we know now, you know, Thatcher's weaselly words about we're going to close a few uneconomical pits wasn't the truth. The National Union was right. They're going to decimate the coal industry. We know all that now. We know about, you know, what happened, about the lies, about the violence, etc. But I think it's one good lesson is about the federated union, divide and rule, making decisions on your own. Just look at this big push now for regional pay bargaining. It's the same sort of thing. You move to regional pay bargaining. It's the same thing as the federated union. If people don't stand together, if working people don't stand together, they're not going to succeed in their better terms and conditions. Also, I suppose when you look at the Conservative government at the time, they were closing coal industry. They were closing a lot of other manufacturing. It was so-called uneconomic. A lot of money was put into the financial sector. The yuppies of the 80s, driving around in Porsches, drinking champagne. Well, you know where I'm going with this one, don't you? We've come full circle. Apparently, we just bailed out the banks in billions of pounds. Not closed them down, to be uneconomic. So there's a bit of an irony there. There's a bit of a legacy there for Thatcher. I suppose as well, you know, since the strike, the richer got richer, the poorer got poorer, working conditions have changed for the worse. What are we, half the membership of the trade unions as they were in the strike? So, unfortunately, although it's a good story, it was, as Benny said, the strike was our cup final, it was our Wembley. If we lost that, it was going to be years of misery for working people. And I suppose in a way that's how it sort of turned out for a lot of people. And I think, well, certainly a few struggles ahead in terms of what's happening now with paying conditions, what's happening across Europe because of the banking crisis. And I fear for the future generations, really, that they're going to be paying for it, paying for what happened then. So I suppose hopefully there won't be another year's strike, because I've had enough of striking now. But you know, I think it's certainly worth documenting, because there is a history there for struggle, for people to learn from as well, what people can do in adversity. I suppose that's the positive side of it. Thank you.
We owe a real debt of gratitude to Darren and the other members of the Dirty 30. We owe a debt of gratitude to Len and Brian for documenting it so that future generations can actually understand what took place. I was very lucky. I was a member of the National Union of Teachers in the middle of the 80s. We were on strike. We actually had 2 joint strike meetings with the Dirty 30 at the St Pack Club in Leicester. And that remains with me. But I think the crucial thing is we don't mourn the fact that we lost the strike. We don't mourn the fact that the Tories attack us. We learn from it. We organise, and we celebrate the people who fought for solidarity.